What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Long Game Podcast hosted by Thomas Kopelman and Jacob Turner. In each episode, you'll hear us break down financial topics that are relevant to you and your situation. Our goal is to help bring credible financial information to you in short, bite-sized episodes.
All opinions expressed on this show are for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. Nothing on the Long Game Podcast should be considered advice. Always consult with your team of professionals before making any decisions regarding your finances.
All right. What is up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Long Game Podcast. Today, I'm really excited for this one. It's going to be a little different, less into the weeds of finances and more into how to make financial decisions that are really in line with you and your life. And so today we have on Abby Davisson. She is the co-author of Money and Love, an intelligent roadmap for life's biggest decisions. She's also the founder and CEO of the Money and Love Institute, and she also hosts the newsletter Practically Deliver It. So Abby, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
So let's just kind of dive right into things here and talk about, maybe the mental model that you really use as we make these type of decisions. Because I think, Jacob and I, obviously you can attest to this too. When you work with people, especially people with a lot of income, decisions are hard, right? Like you can make decisions that are better for money. You can make decisions that are worse for money. And one really strong core belief that I have is that when you've built wealth, you should probably stop making decisions just about money, right? I have this situation, you have all these people who are like, oh, I live in California, I'm making a few $1 million a year. I'm 20 million net worth. I could save a lot in taxes by moving to Texas, right? But if I move to Texas, I grew up in California, my parents are here, my spouse's parents are here. They help take care of our kids. That's a hard one to be like, hey, let's just go move to Texas to save on state taxes when you're going to give up all of those important life things that you just talked about.
No, absolutely. And we're so often taught to separate decisions about money from everything else, right? And just use our heads and analyze those decisions about our career and our finances. And then when it comes to relationships, don't let money cloud that, right? That's materialistic. Really just follow your heart. And it's such a false dichotomy and false siloization of the way life really works. And the best way to make the best decisions is to think about them holistically. So you're exactly right that we need to prioritize and get really clear on what's most important to us and then make decisions from there. And that's really the backbone of the book that you mentioned that I co-authored is a framework for how to think about decisions holistically when they affect both our finances and our relationships.
Okay. Well, let's talk about it because I can just picture, I think everybody can picture how hard this is. And I think Morgan Housel has this quote that's money decisions aren't made at the spreadsheet, they're made at the dinner table, right? And it's I think we all don't think that. We think we meet with our financial advisor, we meet with our tax person, and here's the numbers, go do it. But in reality, we have money, we have relationships, and we have emotions that all kind of come through these decisions. So it's not very easy to do.
No. And, Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winning psychologist who recently passed away, talked about the different ways that the different systems we have for making decisions, right? So system one is very emotional. It's quicker to access. It's how we make decisions when we have big feelings, right? When money brings up a lot of big feelings for most people. But system two is more analytical, more logical, and it's harder to access. And so what we encourage, and what I imagine you want your clients to do, is not make big decisions from that place of anger or fear or guilt or those emotions, but really slow down, take their time, and think about the big decisions they're making from system two. But it's really hard unless you have a way to force yourself to slow down. And so having a framework, having a mental model really does force you to slow down, to turn over the right rocks, and then you can make a decision from an informed place that is not driven by your emotions.
Yeah, it takes you away from being reactive, right? Now we are proactive, we're analytical, we're making the right choice, and we're not just, whoa, this happened, make that decision in that moment. Like we all know that that's definitely not the right way to do it. So what is the right way to do it?
Yeah, so it is absolutely to slow down, so not to make a big decision in an instant. And it's really to, I mean, have something. I mean, we offer a framework. We call ours the 5 Cs. It's not a silver bullet, but and it's not the only model out there by any means. But it's research based, evidence based, and we've used, my co-author and I have used it ourselves to make many life decisions. We've heard from thousands of readers who've used it. So I can share it. But
Yeah.
really, whatever it is that works for you is going to be helpful to you in that particular moment. So our model is the 5 Cs. And I can talk about them at a high level, and then we can go more deeply maybe into some examples that illustrate how they can be used. So the first C is to clarify what is most important to you. And that, it sounds so easy, right? But so many of us are so influenced by what we see our friends doing, what we heard from our parents or our role models growing up, what they wanted us to do. So it's really about quieting those other voices, tuning them out so you could get in touch with what you really care about. The
Okay.
second,
I just want to
yeah, go
actually,
ahead.
I was going to decide if I was going to wait, but I think this is really important. I think in financial planning, a lot of people kind of talk about like this mission statement or, whatever, like your family's goals, whatever's important to them. And I think the reason why that's so important is for exactly what you're saying, right? Like you have the family who talks about like, the most important thing to me is spending time with my family, watching my kids grow up and making great, like having great experiences with them. And then, right, they get this new job offer. They're going to have to travel Monday to Friday. They're going to have to work longer hours, but they're going to make a lot more money. And you can say, well, hey, you never said maximizing more money or you needed more things was important to you. You said this is the most important thing to you. But now it seems like you're trying to like make the decision that doesn't align with that. And I think then a lot of times people have that realization and say like, you're right, right? Like in this motion or in this situation, I'm emotional. I'm excited about new money. Like, I want to make that decision. But when I take a step back and have clarity around what's important to me, I can realize like that is not what's most important.
It's true. And but it's like, that is intangible, right? As opposed to a dollar figure that is very measurable, and it's the measuring stick we were taught, from a very
Yeah.
early age in capitalism, and more is better, right? That is generally the messages we get. So you're right. It's going back and it's having, it sounds like you serve as an accountability partner for your clients to be able to remind them to be that touchstone of saying, wait a minute, let's just talk about this here. And, mimetic desire, that's the term that French philosopher Rene Girard came up with to talk about how powerfully our wants are influenced by other people's wants. So we know that we got that job. Other people would, be really excited for this job. So who am I to say no to something that other people would want, right? And so it takes a lot of self-awareness and self-knowledge to be able to not fall prey to mimetic desire.
Okay. So that's the first C. I think that makes a lot of sense to start there. What's next?
The next C is communicate. And none of us makes decisions in a vacuum. Certainly, if you are in a long-term relationship, that's the person who you need to communicate with early on, maybe before you feel ready. But even if you're not partnered, there are people who are important to you that are going to be affected by the decision. So those are the people, that's the person or people to kind of bring in. And when we think about communicating, we think about what we're going to say. But this step is all about initiating the conversation and listening and thinking about the conditions of where to have that conversation, when to have the conversation, as much as what you're going to say in the conversation.
Okay. That makes sense to me. What's the next one?
So the next one is to consider a broad range of choices. And when we are in a place of high emotion, of stress, we tend to see the extreme options. We tend to see do I stay in California or move to Texas option? Or, do I go for the promotion or quit my job, or do I, keep the business exactly the way it is or sell it, right? Is the two extremes. But part of making a better decision is expanding your consideration set. So choices is all about ways of doing exactly that.
Okay. How do you do that without giving yourself too many choices? If that makes sense. I feel like right now, and something that I can relate to in finance is like we're in the situation where at times you just like people have so many options that they never make any decisions, that sometimes it's really helpful to kind of like, I guess, what do? You start here of all the options and then you narrow it down to the most likely.
Yeah, well, so I should say the first steps, so clarify and communicate go together pretty well. We like to say they're a bit of a dance. Clarify or choices goes really well with the fourth C, which is to check in with trusted resources. So that could be friends, that could be family, other people who face the decision. It could be published research, and there's quite a bit out there actually. And part of what you're doing in that check-in step is starting to both either generate options or narrow options. So you're trying to say, yeah, we don't want to encourage anyone to be in analysis paralysis, but most likely you're not the first person to have faced this decision. There are maybe the specifics are unique to you, but there are some patterns, there's contours that might be similar to other people who have faced this decision. So how can you get information from those other people to start to narrow the options, to start to say, okay, these are the main ones I should be considering in the choices step. So this framework is very iterative. It sounds like, oh, there's 5 steps and I just go through them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but that's not really the case there. And you'll see in the examples, there are ways where the steps actually reinforce each other and will cause you to go back and say, oh, here's an additional choice I hadn't considered. Let's put that on the table. But part of knowing how to work through issues or problems is knowing yourself. And so if you're someone who likes to turn over to put as many possible decisions in your decision tree, you need to guard against the analysis paralysis piece. And so that's where we have a quiz on our book website, moneylovebook.com, that can help people understand what kind of decision maker they are. If that's your type, or you like to analyze things, and a lot of people in the financial advising profession are analyzers, then you need to maybe give yourself a time limit or a time to say, okay, I'm going to spend X number of hours or days generating options, and then I'm going to pull up, and whatever options I have at that point are the ones I'm going to consider. Other people are on the other end of the spectrum, and they're real gut trusters. And for them, there was kind of like the ready, fire, aim types. They might not be generating enough options before they choose one. So they need to actually slow down more and make sure that they have at least 5 great choices that they've considered before they move forward.
Yeah, I feel like when you're going through that, I'm definitely like ready, fire, aim. And sometimes I feel like I need to tell myself, just wait 24 hours.
Me too.
Because, Abby, I feel like every time I've done that, I've come up with like 3 or 4 other options, right? Like, just like you talked about, where I hadn't thought about that in the first 10 minutes, even though I was ready to make the decision 10 minutes in. Biggest decision in my life, I'm ready to make it. As opposed to just waiting 24 hours and maybe going for a walk and realizing there's other options out there.
Totally. And that self-awareness that you have is so helpful. I mean, sometimes it takes being burned, a few times before you realize
just
it.
a few times to get there. It definitely didn't start with any self-awareness. I was like, why do I keep making mistakes on this stuff? And I think, much like you said, having those trusted resources, having somebody come back to you and tell you, hey, remember you got burned because you didn't take more than 10 minutes to make this decision, has really helped.
That's awesome.
So what's the 5th one?
So the 5th one is consequences. So it's really about playing out the likely consequences over different time horizons. And because of our human bias towards the short term, we're pretty good at seeing, the positive or negative things that could happen based on our decision in the very short term, like within the next few months. We're not as great at thinking through what is the likelihood, best case scenario and worst case scenario further out. So this is really about forecasting, if you will, the likely effects of your decision, and making it the best guess, educated guess that you can about what's, if this goes amazingly well, what would happen? If this is terrible, what will happen? And then what's likely to happen is somewhere in between. And it's making sure that you've done that work to trick your brain and overcome that short-term bias.
That makes a lot of sense. I actually really love the order of it because it feels like you're really like narrowing it down, and then you're like, well, wait. Now that I feel like I know what I'm doing, like what's the good and the bad? And I think maybe times when you hear consequences, you only think bad, but I think consequences are both the good and the bad. And so I love this framework. I'm actually really excited to kind of dive into a few of these real life decisions and kind of what that looks like. So I know that you had three pretty good ones, and maybe I kind of hit on one that was a little bit related with my client situation. But the first one that you really wanted to talk about is deciding whether or not to move to a bigger house. You said it's kind of like an example of the many life upgrades we must consider as our wealth grows.
Yeah, and I think, we started writing this book we got our contract in the fall of 2020. So if you want to, take yourself back, flash back to that time, we were all, in lockdown. We were, in my case, living in a very small footprint home in the middle of a city with two young kids. My kids were in Zoom kindergarten and Zoom second grade at the time, which should not be a thing, Zoom kindergarten at all. My husband and I were both, performing high level executive roles that were typically done in an office, but overnight earlier that year had migrated into different rooms of our house. So we had this rotating cast of characters coming in to help our kids get on the Zooms. And so we were all just on top of each other and miserable. So I think no matter what your living situation at the time was, it was not big enough and it was not ideal. But even if outside of COVID times, I think there are a lot of people who think about, okay, I'm now in a different place in my life. I'm about to have a child or have another child, and I should just automatically upgrade my home. So, either I'm renting and I should buy, or I'm living in a, quote unquote starter home and I should really, get a bigger home. And so this framework was really helpful to us as we were thinking through, the decision about moving from a city to the suburbs, which was a decision that was, I would say, simmering for us for a long time, and COVID really turned it up to a boil. And the steps of the framework that were particularly helpful for us during that time were clarifying what we wanted. So we said we wanted more space and schools that were open, because we live in San Francisco, and it was the largest urban school district that was remote the longest in the country. And my father lived nearby, so we started looking in suburbs that were close to him. We checked in with friends. We talked to people who lived in that suburb, who had made the move from the city. And, I talked about published research. It was just coincidental that I happened to be working on the chapter in our book on moving. So we have a chapter on all of the big decisions you make in life, including where to live and when to move and how to think about that. And I came across some interesting research it was in this Journal of Environmental Psychology, and it looked at the effect of density, so square footage per person, on family harmony. And it was so fascinating because, we were like 4 people on top of each other in a small home. I had 2 young kids, as I mentioned. And this article, so you would think like, okay, you get a bigger house, you're not all sharing, one bathroom, and everyone's happier. And what the article says is yes, until a point, but then there's a point of diminishing returns. And actually, if your home gets too large, then young children, particularly boys, which is what I have, can feel disconnected and lonely because they're actually too far from the family to feel connected. And the article went on to say, that the study went on to say that the biggest factor in family harmony is not the actual space per person, but the family's perception of the space. So in so many cases, our perception shapes our reality. So all of our complaints about how small our space was were actually really unhelpful. So the article kind of made us take a beat. But when we thought about consequences, actually, this is when it really hit home for us, because first of all, my husband and I both have MBAs, so we're total nerds. We made a decision tree that examined the likelihood that schools would be open, the following school year. We were kind of pessimistic, but we also ran the numbers on what our mortgage payments would look like. And at that point, everyone was looking for more space, especially in the suburbs, and housing prices were incredibly inflated. And so we looked at, what we would be paying, how much more it would be from our current mortgage, and realized it would actually really impact our career flexibility and tether us to the corporate jobs we were currently at that point working in. And we both had really entrepreneurial aspirations. We both wanted to start our own businesses. And so we re-clarified, right? This is where the iterative piece comes in, that what mattered more than space and open schools to us was career flexibility. Mm-hmm. So we decided to stay in our current home where we had built up a lot of home equity. We had pretty low payments that were under control. And then once we had made that choice to stay, the choices opened up. So we thought about, how do we get more space and open schools without moving? I decided to rent an office nearby. So that's where I'm recording this conversation. And then we actually switched our kids' schools. And, these were decisions made over a number of months, but the framework really helped us get at what was truly important to us. And I will say that both of us have since started our own businesses, left those corporate jobs, and are very happy with the choices that we made in that regard.
I really like this because I'm realizing more and more that this is like accidentally what I do when having conversations with clients in a less structured way. And I'm thinking about, I very similar situation to you, somebody I'm working with. They both are very highly compensated. They both work at really great publicly traded companies. They make 7 figures a year. And, we went through all their goals and they were like wedding, house, start a business, car. Like it was like 7 goals. And we're like, great, let's put these in order of priority, right? So we can figure out how to best align your money for that. We did that. And then we went through this and was like, hey, if you do, here's the price of the house. Here's what that's going to cost you. Here's what your leftover money is going to be if you're both working your same jobs. Here's what your money in your deficit would look like if one of you went to start the business. And that helped them realize, like, our priority is actually the business, not the house, right? So if that means we keep renting for a few more years so I can start the business, that's the best decision for me. But a lot of times, right, we need to lay it all out there, think through the consequences. And I think as professionals working with people, the best thing we can do is say, here's what that would do. How does that make you feel? And then it makes them feel like, oh man, like, I don't know how we'd get enough cash to run, to be able to do that for 2 years if the business doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. But like, I think I really love that the way that you just kind of distilled your decision down, and it ultimately got you to the point to say, I do know that starting the business was most important, because you started with all of these things that were important. And then it ended with, here's the order that those are prioritized so I can best make decisions based on that.
Yeah, because it's all trade-offs, right? We can't do everything. We certainly can't do everything all at once. And so sometimes, it makes it very clear when the numbers are on a page what those trade-offs are. And then you have to really do the soul searching of what is really, truly most important. And, I think my mother passed away during the time when I was writing the book. And I think that really clarified for me that we don't know how long we have, and that, I knew, I dove into the research on regret as well. And there's research around people regret the chances they didn't take, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's not, the things you did that didn't go well or the things that went sideways. It's, we are wired for growth as humans. And if we don't have a chance to shoot for our goals, those are the things that haunt us. And I really had that in mind when we were making these choices.
I think it's interesting too, Abby. You mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, we are so wired to want to do stuff that other people want to do, because our human nature sees somebody buy a new car, buy a bigger house, or go on the vacation, and we say, well, we want to do that, without even thinking, like, do I really want that? And I think oftentimes, like, you see it time and time again, people do all those things, and then much like you and your husband were in the situation, they didn't even think about the fact that if I did all those things, now I'm tethered to this job that maybe I don't want. And that's not to say that happens for everybody, but I think your decision-making framework to think about it arguably saved you guys years off of doing something that you don't want to do, all because of one decision that stemmed from a house that stemmed from COVID. And now it led you guys to have optionality to start your own business and write a book you want to do, and then understand better what future regret looks like and how to minimize it, all because you started to think about, do I really want something that somebody else has?
Yeah, I mean, it's well, they say all research is me search, right? So I've definitely been pursuing something that I think is just personally interesting, and we've heard so many stories. I mean, I'm sharing my own stories, but we've heard so many stories from entrepreneurs trying to figure out how to spend their time, to people in their 80s trying to figure out how to make end of life decisions, which are incredibly complex. Saying like, this framework was so helpful to me because these decisions are so overwhelming, right? And so what is helpful is breaking them down into manageable pieces that you can think